What up, y'all? It's the Rachness here. Trying to collect myself just a little bit before I get into what I'm about to talk about. Had a little bit of controversy with a fellow individual who's in the beer community around me. We have a lot of mutual friends and whatnot. And we had an exchange about a week ago based off of two posts that I had in my story. So before I get into discussing what all went down, before I get into addressing the video that was made about me today, I do just want to say that I hope that this video helps shine a light on how inherent racism is perceived, and I hope it addresses the questions that were initially asked of me. So my initial intention was to address the questions that came my way when I was first accused of being racist. That was what I was planning on doing. But I was tired, y'all, okay? I did not have the energy to put this together, but now I do. I'm wide awake, so I will be getting into it. But before we kind of break down the conversation, before we talk about what my point of view is on how the whole conversation went down and on Brewcan Man's response to it, I do want to give you the initial post. That way you have context, you have clarity as to what the actual discussion that we had was about, because we actually have not discussed directly any of the most of the things that we talked about in the post. So yeah, here are the original posts. I'm going to leave them up here, so if you want to pause or something to watch them, then you can do that. All right, y'all, let's go ahead and get into it now. Now that you have some background information as to what the actual conversations were about, just because the original posts were so small in this screenshot, I wanted to give you that. So first comment is about the first post, right? About specifically COVID-19. And he implies in our conversation that I'm saying that COVID-19 is targeting people of color, right? He then claims that I'm ignorant, essentially, because he doesn't understand what I'm posting. But rather than ask me about, is this like a statistically proven thing or anything, without having any empathy, right? Without just sitting down to listen as an ally, he accuses me of saying something that I'm not. So let's go ahead and pause here and talk about how COVID-19 is disproportionately affecting Black, Indigenous, and other people of color. Okay, so generally speaking, this is a statistical fact. Okay, this is something that has been documented in multiple states. We were seeing that in Illinois, 43% of people who died from the disease and 28% who tested positive were African American. And they were only 15% of the state's population. That's a high amount of individuals of contracting the disease and dying, right? For such a small population. And we were seeing that throughout the states. Even President Trump acknowledged that there were disparities. And he said officials were going to look into why. But we know why. It's because of longstanding inequalities that exist in our society because of systemic racism. That is why. It's because we have more Black, Indigenous, and other people of color who are on the front lines, who don't have the benefit of working from home, right? Who may not have equal access to healthcare. So yeah, it is a disease that is disproportionately affecting us. And I'm not specifically saying that this disease is targeting anyone. I don't believe the disease is targeting anyone. It's a disease. It's just going to spread. But I do think that we have systems in place that do affect people of color more so than others. And I believe that because it's statistically proven. It's a fact. It is an existing matter. Now, moving into the second piece, and the second post was the Rachel Cargle post talking about Lana Del Rey, right? And so in his response to me, well, in the post, let me address this. Rachel Cargle has a term in there where she says white womaning, if you read the post earlier on. So here he's calling out what is white womaning. It's not even a term. This is called marketing. People around the US use it all the time. People of all colors use marketing. And here he's not addressing the fact that, yes, it is marketing. And it's marketing at the expense of people of color and the tokenization of people of color. That's the problem, right? That is the systemic racism. So that's what it is. It's not just, quote, marketing. It's an issue. Now, I'm not even going to address the last part of this comment because it adds absolutely nothing to the conversation at hand. So we are going to ignore it and pretend like it does not exist. And if you do want to have a productive and meaningful conversation with somebody ever at any point in time, I would definitely recommend just sticking to the points, right? Not trying to divert the subject, or I don't know if he's like tone policing me here or gaslighting. I don't even know. I don't give a shit. So we're not gonna talk about that one. Moving on. Next part of the conversation. Okay, trying to be a little bit more concise now, because this is getting really long already. He restates my claim, right? We already covered that statistically. Yep. Disproportionately people of color that have died. Yep. Implying the pandemic is being used to hurt people of color. I've never implied that. My post did not imply that. None of what I said has implied that. Now, here's what I do believe, though. People in charge don't give a shit that it's hurting people of color. If our president had to say, I'm looking into why they're dying at disproportionate rates when we know that systemic racism creates barriers to people of color, then he's too far gone to help us. We need the right people in office. So, yeah. He then makes this gross oversimplification of these two very complex issues by trying to create a false equivalence between them. So he tries to talk about reverse racism and I guess reverse spousal abuse, but there isn't such a thing as reverse spousal abuse. It's just called spousal abuse for a reason, because any spouse can abuse their spouse. And it also doesn't have to be between just a man and just a woman. So you have no argument here. Moving forward. He then says, I make no sense and can't even prove the words I speak into existence. Tells me to get my facts straight and stop giving vague replies. Look, I'm fucking tired and it's not my job to educate you. Okay, like there's this thing out there called the internet that you can use. If you don't understand something, if it doesn't make sense, ask a question. Don't just accuse someone of being a racist, right? Like, that's kind of douchey, especially a person of color. Like, that's some white privilege ass shit. Then he calls me a racist again. Cool. All right, y'all. So I'm going to let you read through this little exchange from the things that I said to him. And I don't know, maybe I should have had a little more empathy. I don't know. But I'll let you read through this exchange. Basically, he admits that he lacks education in racism. He chalks it up to being not a racist. But here's the thing. If you lack education in a topic, you don't have a place at the table. You can't speak to that topic. Or if you speak to it, you speak to it ignorantly. And that's exactly how you came off in this, Darren. Sorry. So go ahead and give this little post a read. And then let's talk about what racism is. Okay. Okay, so let's talk about what racism is and talk about the facts, because now I've been challenged to prove the words I speak into existence, which I do want to call out is a logical fallacy. It's called the burden of proof. It's when someone makes a claim and then they put that on you to prove the claim false, but they've never actually made a claim. They've never actually provided evidence or anything to back it up themselves. So it's a really shitty and actually it's like a non-argument, which is basically how this entire conversation went. It's a lot of straw manning, a lot of gaslighting, a lot of false equivalencies, and here we go, burden of proof. So we're in it, addressing it head on. So racism by definition is prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism directed against someone of a different race based on the belief that one's own race is superior. Now, this is just the dictionary definition, okay? It's not the end-all be-all, because we have both structural racism and individual racism, right? Two different types of racism that exist, and there's even more beyond that. Now, these are all topics for another day. So based solely on the definition of it's prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism directed against someone of a different race based on the belief that one's own race is superior. Based on just that definition, we're looking at 5 specific words, okay? One's own race is superior. So to be racist is to assume a position of power over people of other races, okay? It's to be superior to them. Now, reverse racism doesn't exist because we do not hold power, okay? Black, Indigenous, and other people of color do not hold the power in America, okay? It is white people in America that hold a majority of the power. Now, here's what I will say. People of color can be prejudiced, sure, but can we be racist? No, because we are not in the upper hand at any point in time. And I don't actually believe that my race is superior to anybody's. I would just like a little equity for people of color in this country. That's all I'm looking for, you know? But that's just me. Now, racism in the US is institutionalized, okay? It's built into the core of our history. Literally, our country was built on the backs of slaves under the premise that these Black bodies were worth less than white ones. So no, racism does not work both ways. It works one way, and I'm not a racist for speaking up for people of color. Now, here's what I will say, Darren. What are you? Do you even acknowledge? Have you seen at all how the words that you've relayed to me could be misconstrued as you coming off as racist? Maybe take a moment to reflect on that, right? Like, I don't know how standing up for Black lives and for just in general, BIPOC, I'm just going to start saying it that way, okay? It takes me forever to say Black, Indigenous, and other people of color. So BIPOC, if you feel like it's a threat for me to stand up for them, if you feel like it's a threat for me to call out white supremacy and systems of power that generally are oppressive to us, that ultimately hurt BIPOC, if you're against that, Darren, then you need to reevaluate where you really stand in our communities. All right, Jill. So I'm not going to read through line by line for the last 3 DMs. So if you want to go through those at your own pace, feel free. Feel free to pause the video at any time to go through them. Now, here's what I will talk about. The very last part of this, which I think speaks volumes about not only Darren as a quote ally, right, but to anybody who considers themselves to be a quote ally or who quote supports Black lives, right, but doesn't always back that up with their language or their actions. The very last thing he said to me is that he would not be reading the informational post I'd already addressed that I would be making, right? And that to me says you don't care about being an ally, Darren. So that's willful ignorance. That is ultimately what brought us to our little drama today. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for joining me on that little educational journey. I hope that you learned something, maybe. Maybe it was a new way to explain something. Maybe you have now a more concrete definition of racism that you can help use in facilitating difficult conversations. I don't know. I hope that it provided some kind of insight for you in some way, shape, or form. Now, I will say this, after having that conversation with Darren, I really did not feel ally vibes. So I was genuinely surprised to see that he posted in response to the Blackout Tuesday today. And I did comment to see, hey, did you have like a change of heart? I tried to keep it kind of lighthearted. And my comment was deleted. That made me think that it was some kind of performative action, something that was not with the full intention of supporting the movement, right? That it was to maintain some kind of an image or something. That's the impression I got based off of the conversation that we had and the post that he did and the action of taking my comment down. Now, after watching the video that he's made in response to me, I do have a number of thoughts, starting with that he really doesn't understand my perspective of the Black Lives Matter movement at all, just about. He still very much is thinking that I am anti-white, which I'm also not. I'm just pro-black, pro-brown, pro-bi, POC. But that doesn't mean that I'm anti-white. I'm also pro-white. I mean, white people are cool. If you have my back. If you want to dismantle systems of oppression, like, we cool. That's awesome. Yeah. And same thing with people of color, right? Like, I also have to check my privilege as someone who is a lighter skinned Latina. That's something that I actively work at. I try to be a strong ally. I hope I'm considered a strong ally. It's not really up to me to decide, but I hope that that's what I'm considered, right? Like, I'm trying to do my best, trying to put in the work. And I do try to stop and listen to Black and Indigenous voices, especially, right? But other BIPOC voices as well. Now, with that said, I felt like Darren's video was super defensive just in general. It was like so angry. I'm sorry you were so mad. But watching it pretty much just reinforced the entire conversation that I'd already had with him, right? Where my point of view was misconstrued. I, again, did not really hear arguments for how I'm anti-white. I heard a lot of misplacement of what the real cause is, what the real issue is at hand, right? I heard that in his language. So something to hopefully help you in any difficult conversation. If you say but, it negates the first part of the sentence. Totally nullifies it. It's like it didn't even happen. So only the second part of the sentence really remains. A simple fix is to switch but for and if you are trying to express two thoughts that do coexist at the same time. If you are trying to express just one thought that exists, then use a but. Cool, do that. If you want to express two thoughts, though, mutually, simultaneously existing, then use an and. That's the better way to do it. Now, I would say one of two things about what Darren said. So in his video, he did say George Floyd's death was terrible, awful, heinous, right? But property damage, right? And then he went on a long diatribe about that. So the problem I have with that sentence is that it places the emphasis, the but negates the George Floyd part, right? And the focus is on that latter piece of it. And the movement really is about ending systemic racism, right? So that police brutality can come to an end, so that we don't have another George Floyd, so that we don't have another Breonna Taylor, so that we don't have another life lost, right? To racism, to white supremacy, to systemic racism. So by saying that first and then saying but, you totally negate that issue. That is a plague on our society. And yeah, so I do think that you talking all about the property damage and the looters and etc. I think that shows that you're not either fully comprehending the degree of systemic racism, of injustice in this country, or maybe it's that you don't want to see it. I'm not sure. Maybe it's hard to recognize. I'm not sure what it is for you, but ultimately I don't feel, based off of your video, based off of our previous conversation, that you really do have that interest at heart. I hope that that's the general interest, and if that is what you want to convey, then I do suggest trying to be a stronger ally and trying to listen to other BIPOC voices and actually listen to them instead of talking over them, trying to kind of tone police, which is what you did with me, and talking about like what I post being like all positive, and then I post like all this hateful stuff. That's not what it is. And also, if it was what it was, then that's my right to post that if I want to. If I am angry, I'm allowed to post something that's angry, right? It's my right to express myself as well. So just like you said, you encouraged me to express myself. I'm now expressing myself. The last point that I do want to bring up, Darren, or the last 2 points I'll say, are these. In our initial conversation, my first post was about COVID, and the call to action was about voting ultimately, right? And doing the work that way. So in your video, you call me out by saying that I'm destroying property, I'm blah, blah, blah. But I have made calls to action to vote. I have been doing that. It's something that I do also believe in. In fact, that was what I talked about in my post. So I find it really ironic, Darren, that in this video, you're trying to dictate, first of all, the right way to try to find justice. You mention voting, you harp on it, that you support it, and so do I. So I don't understand why there's so much like animosity inside of this video, when ultimately, if we are falling on the same page, if we are both trying to fight for systemic racism to end, right, for injustices to end, for police brutality to end, then I'm not sure why the attacks, or why you think it's racist to call out individuals for not necessarily supporting the cause, right, for acting in ways that uphold those systems, those thoughts, those ideas. So I'm just going to leave it there. I'm not going to address every single point that he made, because honestly, I'll be here all fucking night going through it, and I'm tired. So I'm going to go ahead and end this little video now. Thank you all so much for joining me on this journey. I'm sorry it was so long. Maybe it's something to listen to. I don't know. Hopefully it helped, but let me know. Thanks. Bye, y'all. And don't forget, Black Lives Matter.